My name is Cecile Bethune, and I'm 24 years old. I've never been physically slapped, but that afternoon felt close enough. Sometimes life doesn't hit you with a hand, it hits you with a cake. A chocolate sheet cake, white frosting, blue cursive lettering, gold confetti sprinkled like someone Googled celebration and bought the first thing they saw. It sat proudly on my parents' kitchen island like it owned the house. And on it, congrats, Danielle. Not congrats, Cecile and Danielle. Not, we're proud of both of you. Not even, also Cecile. Just my sister's name, glowing under the kitchen lights like a spotlight that had never once turned toward me. I stood there holding a plastic cup of warm lemonade, pretending I wasn't waiting for someone to notice how humiliating it was. Maybe your name's on the back, Joe, my best friend since 7th grade, whispered. I forced a laugh. It's a Costco cake. They could fit a full eulogy on it. Joe snorted. And trust me, they would if Danielle wrote one. I kept pretending it was fine. The flyers, decorations, and jazz playlist all catered to Danielle. Jazz. A genre she didn't even like. But Princeton liked jazz, and that was enough. The party was supposed to be a celebration for both of us. Danielle for graduating with honors, me for finishing my electrical apprenticeship. Same roof, same family, different universes. Every conversation ended the same way. So what are you doing now, Cecile? Then the pause, the judgment, when I said, I am apprenticing as an electrician. Danielle floated through the yard in a pristine white dress, hugging relatives, posing for photos like some brochure model. I wore a button-down that didn't fit and jeans I'd worn to work last week. I waited for my mom's toast, thinking she might acknowledge me. Just a sentence, a crumb. She tapped her fork against her glass. A toast, she said, to Danielle for her academic excellence, leadership, and grace under pressure. Nothing about me, not a breath. Joe stiffened beside me. The humiliation settled like wet cement. Later, I approached Mom, trying to sound casual. I pointed at the cake. Did they forget my name, or... She didn't even look at me. Well, you dropped out, she said casually, as if she were mentioning the weather. Joe's jaw dropped. Did she just... Yep, I answered. For a second I stood there, hoping time might rewind. It didn't. Danielle sliced her cake while Dad bragged about her future. I was a background character. My boyfriend Evan texted, How's the party? Want me to come get you? But I didn't want him to see this. Not with his ex Lila still hovering online, always posting subtle jabs like, Danielle-level women don't need apprenticeships. I didn't need more eyes on my humiliation. I left exactly 13 minutes later. 12 minutes pretending sparkling water didn't taste like it had been bullied by a lime, and the last minute spent deciding whether leaving would cause drama. It didn't. No one noticed. I slipped out the back, past the inflatable champagne bottle someone rented for vibes, and kept walking until the party noise faded. Joe texted, You left? I replied, I left. Did you at least eat the cake? Nope. Good. Probably tasted like student debt and favoritism. I smiled. The painful kind. Walking down Maple Street, wind brushing against my face, I realized my family didn't forget me. They just didn't care enough to remember. I'd been walking away from them since I was 15. Tonight I just finally caught up. Later, sitting on the hood of Joe's dented car outside a 24/7 diner, I whispered, Do you think I messed up dropping out? She shook her head. No, I think you messed up by expecting your mom to be someone she's never been. You're the only person I know who actually does something. Not fantasizes, not pretends. Does it. I looked at my calloused hands. Steady, real, and something settled inside me. If they wanted to pretend I didn't exist, then fine. Let's see how they handle it when I really disappear. My routines became my shelter after the party. Waking up before sunrise, pulling on my worn work boots, loading wire spools into the van that smelled permanently of solder and burnt plastic. It was the one place where my worth wasn't debated or compared to Danielle's LinkedIn achievements. Out on job sites, the only thing that mattered was whether a circuit worked or didn't. No pageantry, no speeches, no cakes with selective names. Tony, my boss, wasn't soft, but he was fair. He trusted me. In Tony's world, trust was worth more than any diploma. You're reliable, he grunted one morning while we rewired a farmhouse filled with knob and tube nightmares. Like a wrench, not flashy, just works. That was his version of a compliment. Joe later joked, "You're more like a Swiss Army knife with trauma." Maybe she was right. I'd learned everything from panels to permits to troubleshooting code violations that were older than my parents' marriage. But the emotional static from the party didn't fade. Not even Evan's texts helped. He was trying, but he didn't know about the cake or the toast. I didn't want to drag him into my family's brand of quiet cruelty, especially when his ex, Lila, still hovered on his social media like a mosquito that refused to die. Every time he posted something about us, she'd leave a friendly comment. "Looks fun. Danielle would have loved this spot." As if my sister was the standard I'd never reach. I told myself I didn't care, but it itched. 2 weeks after the party, Tony and I sat in the city records office waiting on permit paperwork, the kind of place where fluorescent lights go to die. I leaned over the counter, bored. That's when I saw a name I recognized. 474 Elmont Avenue, my childhood home. But under owner, it listed a property management company. Not my parents. For a moment, I thought I'd misread it. I blinked, leaned closer. Lease expiration, 60 days. Current tenant, Bethune, L&R. My parents were renting. I felt something in my chest tilt, like a puzzle piece rotating suddenly into place. "Everything good?" Tony asked, without looking up from his form. "Yeah," I lied, but my brain was buzzing like a faulty transformer. That night, like any emotionally detached adult with a suspicion, I went home and started digging. Property records, public listings, tax registries. The house wasn't owned by my parents. It hadn't been for years. They'd sold it quietly and were just tenants now. Tenants with a lease ending soon. And the house was going back onto the rental market. I stared at the computer screen in the dim glow of my apartment and whispered the wildest thought I'd had all year. What if I bought it? Not to decorate, not to live in. To reclaim the space where I'd spent my whole life being treated like a footnote. To finally flip the power dynamic. Legally, cleanly, silently. I didn't tell Joe right away. Or Evan. Definitely not Evan. He'd try to talk me down, and I couldn't risk anyone interfering with whatever this fire was growing inside me. Joe would laugh and then help. Evan would worry and then suggest therapy. I wasn't in the mood for either. The next day, I called the number listed for the property manager, pretending I was looking for rentals. "Anything coming up around Elmont Avenue?" I asked. A woman named Terry answered, voice raspy from decades of cigarettes and stress. "Actually, yeah. Beautiful corner home. Old craftsman. Lease is up soon. Tenants have been there a while." My parents, the same people who couldn't be bothered to put both daughters' names on a cake, were now one step away from losing the home they'd used as a stage to perform their affection for Danielle. I didn't feel guilty, not even a little. I needed money, real money, to pull off what I was imagining. Savings I'd scraped together working overtime, doing side jobs in creepy basements where wallpaper peeled like sunburn. I called Tony's old buddy Mark, a mortgage broker with 3 divorces and a sense of humor built entirely from cynicism. "You're how old?" he asked. 24. "And you make how much?" I told him. A long whistle. "And you want to buy what?" I gave the address. "You aware this is a competitive zip code?" "Yeah," I said, "but I think it has termites." "I like you already." The process was brutal. Documents, inspections, signatures, jargon designed to make the average person cry. But each step pulled me forward. The inspection revealed a leaky basement, outdated plumbing, and a raccoon squatter in the attic. It all sounded fixable. It all sounded like opportunity. All the while, Evan kept texting, "You okay? Haven't heard from you much." I kept answering with vague reassurances. Lila continued leaving annoying comments like, "Hope Cecile supports your ambitions the way Danielle would have." My silence to Evan grew heavier. 2 weeks later, while eating microwave noodles at my apartment counter, my phone rang. "Mark." "Congrats, he said. "You're approved." For a moment, I didn't breathe. "And the offer?" I whispered. "Accepted. Closing in 10 days. The apartment felt too small for how enormous that moment was. My childhood home, the place where I'd been ignored, minimized, overshadowed, was about to legally belong to me. That night, I walked to Elmont Avenue. The porch light flickered just like it did when I was 13. The hydrangeas my mother planted were wilted. The wind chime Danielle gifted them years ago still hung crooked. Through the living room window, I saw faint silhouettes of my parents moving around, unaware that someone who used to sleep upstairs, crying quietly into a pillow, now held the power to decide their future there. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, like a storm settling into its final shape. Soon, I wasn't just going to walk away from my family's neglect. I was going to rewrite the ending. 10 days later, under a gray drizzle that felt more exhausted than dramatic, I signed the last stack of paperwork. 30 pages of legal jargon, initials, signatures, dates. When the final pen stroke dried, the closing agent slid a brass key across the desk. "Congratulations, Ms. Bethune. You're now the property owner." Those words hit harder than every dismissal my family ever threw my way. I stepped out into the parking lot, clutching the key like it might dissolve if I loosened my grip. I didn't text Joe. I didn't call Evan. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. I wanted to feel the weight of it alone. That evening, I drove to Elmont Avenue and parked a block away. The house glowed softly from the inside, warm light spilling through the curtains. The same curtains my mother insisted on buying, even though I loved the blue ones. Through the living room window, I watched Dad flipping through channels, Mom pacing with a dish towel over her shoulder. Danielle wasn't there. She had her own apartment paid for partly by my parents, partly by her high-paying corporate internship. I stood there silently, the key warming in my palm, feeling a strange calm settle over me. Not revenge, not triumph. Something more precise, like balance. I didn't plan anything dramatic. I didn't want sparkles or glitter bombs like Joe suggested. I wanted cold, clean, administrative vengeance. The kind that leaves no room for misinterpretation and no room for excuses. The next morning, I typed the letter. To the current tenants of 474 Elmont Avenue, this notice is to inform you of an administrative change in property ownership. The lease remains in effect, but future correspondence should be directed to the undersigned. C. Bethune, property owner. No warmth, no apology, no flourish, just corporate clarity. Joe read it before I mailed it. "Cecile, this sounds like the letter you get before your electricity gets shut off." "Perfect. Needs a little garnish. Maybe an emoji of a house collapsing." I chose Garamond instead. Elegant, judgmental. I slid the envelope into their mail slot and walked away without looking back. 3 days later, an unknown number called. I let it ring. It went to voicemail. Mom's voice spilled through the speaker, thin and shaky. "Cecile, we got a letter. Is this real? Are you sure? Can you call me back, please?" The crack in her voice was new. Not regret, uncertainty. For once, she was the one unsure of her footing. That evening, I drove by the house again. Through the window, I saw Danielle pacing with her phone pressed to her ear, Dad sitting rigidly in his recliner, Mom rereading the letter like it might rearrange itself if she blinked hard enough. Watching them from the street felt surreal, like seeing the inside of a snow globe you'd finally shaken hard enough. By breakfast the next morning, my phone buzzed with a group chat notification, a chat I hadn't been included in for nearly 2 years. Family chat. Read Art Mom. "Cecile, can we talk about this?" Dad. "We should have been consulted." Danielle. "This is kind of aggressive." Mom. "We raised you better than this." I stared at that line. We raised you better. Raised me? Like which part? The silence? The cake? The selective affection? Joe looked over my shoulder and made a face like she smelled rotten fruit. Oh, good. The gaslighting has entered the group chat. Classic. More messages rolled in. Danielle. "Look, I get you're upset, but don't burn bridges over a party. The cake wasn't even my idea. I told them you should have been included. I fought for you. I actually laughed at that. Sharp and humorless." Danielle fought for me the same way people donate $1 at checkout and call themselves philanthropists. I didn't respond. Instead, I drafted the second letter, the one that would end everything definitively. To the current tenants of 474 Elmont Avenue, this serves as your formal notice that the lease will not be renewed. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. I attached the PDF to the group chat without a caption. 10 minutes later, Danielle called. Declined. Dad called, declined. Mom called. I let it ring until the last vibration rattled my hand, then let it go to voicemail. Cecile, please. This isn't the way. We can fix this. You're still family. Still family. I thought about Danielle's cake, about my mother's shrug, about every moment they pretended I was invisible. Still family only mattered when the consequences finally reached them. That night, I drove back to the house one more time. The porch light was off. The living room dark. A single lamp was on upstairs. Probably Dad reading or pretending not to panic. I parked across the street and stared at the house that raised me with rules, pressure, and conditional affection. The house I used to tiptoe in so I wouldn't disturb Danielle's studying. The house where my every accomplishment was met with, "That's nice, but Danielle," the house that wasn't theirs anymore, and finally, was mine. I didn't feel cruel. I didn't feel guilty. I felt equal for the first time in my life. Move-out day came quietly. No shouting, no confrontation, no final dramatic showdown like the movies Joe and I always joked about. I didn't go, not out of fear, but because I didn't need to be there. The house wasn't a battlefield anymore. The war had already been won the moment I stopped needing their recognition. Terry, the property manager, handled everything. She was efficient, emotionless, uninterested in family drama, my ideal representative. At noon, she texted me a photo, an empty key hook by the front door. No notes, no commentary, just the absence of keys, the end of their tenancy, the end of an era I'd spent my whole life trying to escape. I stared at the photo longer than I expected. The house looked exactly the same. Beige walls, scuffed molding, the same crooked ceiling vent I once stuck a birthday note into at age 9 because no one else remembered. And yet it felt completely different. Lighter. Like someone had opened a window for the first time in 20 years. Joe and I met at our usual diner to celebrate, though celebrate might have been too festive a word. "So," she said, sliding a milkshake toward me, "are you going to rent it out? Turn it into a haunted museum of emotional neglect?" I snorted. "Eventually. I'll fix the plumbing first." Joe grinned. "You know, if this were a movie, this is where your mom shows up in the rain crying and begging you to forgive her." I shook my head. She won't. They don't think what they did was that bad. A week later, a plain envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting before I even opened it. My mother. The letter was written in careful loops, the kind she practiced when sending holiday cards to relatives she barely remembered. "Cecile, we didn't mean to hurt you. We never knew how to handle things. The house was our home. Losing it feels like we're losing you again. Mom." The tone wasn't apologetic, not really. It was more like they regretted the consequence, not the cause. They regretted losing comfort, not losing me. I placed the letter in a frame and hung it behind my desk, not as a trophy, not as a wound, as proof. Proof that I wasn't being dramatic. Proof that the silence I gave them was earned. Proof that they only looked for me when something was taken away, never when I needed them. Evan came over that night with takeout. He'd been patient, too patient, while I waited through this storm. He didn't know everything until now. I'd kept him at a distance, partly to protect him, partly because I didn't want his ex Lila to twist anything further. When I finally told him the whole story, the cake, the house, the eviction, he didn't judge me. He didn't flinch. He just listened. "You didn't do this because you're angry," he said softly. "You did it because you've been ignored your whole life. This is the first time you chose yourself." His words hit me harder than any of the group chat messages ever could. I didn't cry, but something unclenched inside me. Lila tried inserting herself one last time, leaving a snarky comment under one of Evan's posts. "Must be nice dating someone who's finally successful." Evan blocked her without a word. Later he told me, "She wants the drama. I want us." And strangely, that did more healing than my parents' letter ever could. A month later, new tenants moved into the house, a young couple, just out of college, excited, hopeful, completely unaware of the emotional ghosts tucked into the corners of the place. I gave them a small rent discount after the inspector found a leaky faucet I didn't care to fix myself. They didn't ask about the previous tenants, and I didn't volunteer information. Why would I? That story was closed. That evening, I stood across the street from the house one last time. The porch light glowed steadily, repaired after years of flickering. The hydrangeas were trimmed. The wind chime was gone, replaced with a simple brass bell. I hung myself. It didn't feel like my childhood home anymore. It felt like something new, something mine. Jo joined me after work, hands stuffed into her jacket pockets. How's it feel? I exhaled, like I took back a place that never let me exist fully. And now? Now I exist. There was no dramatic sunset, no orchestral swell, just me, Jo, the streetlights humming softly, and a house that finally felt neutral instead of heavy. We didn't stay long. Closure doesn't require lingering. It requires moving on. Later that night, on my kitchen counter, I placed a cake, a small one. Chocolate, white frosting, extra thick. It didn't say Danielle. It didn't say anything passive-aggressive. It just said, "Congrats, Cecile." Because I could. And this time, I sliced the first piece for myself.